Hello, good morning, afternoon. Welcome back, everybody. This is Ian. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I will provide a brief overview of flipped learning, some of the underlying theory, and to finish, I'll give you a brief example of the first flipped learning technique that I used with high school students. First, a little bit of academic ease here. Flipping the classroom is a pedagogical method to blended learning, in which the typical activities of classroom lectures, followed by homework in traditional teaching procedures, are in reversed order, and often supplemented or integrated with instructional videos. So that's a lot of words, but what Hung is essentially saying is that in a flipped classroom, students will try to watch or in some ways absorb the new content of a class at home, and they will work more on project or different exercises or activities inside of class. So it's the opposite of what a typical classroom is conducted, in which an instructor lectures the new material during class, and then students work on exercises outside of class as homework. Flipped learning is essentially the opposite. Students absorb new material outside of class, and then they come in with questions or ready to apply the new materials inside of class. So, in another way of saying this, outside of class, the goal is for students to prepare to participate in class activities, and outside of class, the goal is students to check their understanding and extend their learning. However, inside a class, a flipped class, students are supposed to practice applying key concepts with feedback. This is where an instructor can really come in handy, not to just fill the students' heads up like water in a bucket, but to serve as a facilitator to help students on their own learning journey. So, what specifically can students do outside of class in a flipped classroom? Well, they have a lot of choices as an instructor. I've mostly focused on video lectures. I've given you many video lectures during the course of session one and parts of session two. But you can do other things like different online resources. Some examples include TED Ed, YouTube Music, YouTube, Khan Academy. So, for example, one professor talked about how she once assigned her students to watch a movie trailer as homework. And the students watched the trailer, and then the professor prepared some discussion questions for the students upon arriving to class. Sometimes reading material can serve as a flipped model, but sometimes reading material can be very tedious if it's too lengthy. But what I also really enjoy about flipped learning is that it allows the students to prepare questions ahead of time. If there's something about the content that they don't understand, that's okay. They can come and they can have their questions answered in class, which I think is a very rewarding use of not only the classroom time, but also of the instructor's time as well. So, outside of class, students are trying to absorb new content and figure out what questions that they have. What about in class? Well, for one, something that I try to do a lot is to resolve questions. I know that I don't always say everything clearly, so it's very useful, especially early on in class, to resolve students' questions. And fortunately, because it's not a real time lecture, students' questions are often in greater depth and can provide a more deeper understanding with the questions that they form. On top of that, we can do things like discussions or maybe some kind of group activity or project work. Essentially, in class time is where students can apply the concepts that they try to absorb outside of class, bring it into class, and find a way for them to apply that knowledge to really demonstrate their learning. Here's just a brief example of a class time breakdown in a traditional classroom versus a flipped classroom. As you can see, in a traditional classroom, a big chunk of time is dedicated to lecturing new content. 30 to 45 minutes. Wow, that's a huge part of class. And I've really enjoyed trying to use these flipped video lectures because I think it's given us in our class a lot more time to really apply and to engage and to discuss, as opposed to simply me talking and some of you all falling asleep with glazed eyeballs. So in a flipped classroom, the biggest difference is there's often a question and answer time. So the instructor will sort of open the floor for students to present any questions that they have on something that they are confused about. And then a huge chunk of the time, 75 minutes, is dedicated to some kind of guided or independent practice or lab activity. This was taken from a scholarly text about a chemistry course, but the same principles can be applied to foreign language learning or almost any other subject, really. I've even heard of PE teachers that have used flipped learning to get students more up to speed on how to perform a particular activity or how to play a particular game. One really great aspect, I think, of flipped learning is that it really changes the role of the instructor in the classroom. So, in a more traditional classroom, the teacher often takes on the role of a lecturer or an instructor. They are responsible for delivering that content during class time and for students to take notes. Like I said before, like an instructor is pouring water into the buckets that is students' minds. However, when we try to flip the learning a little bit, the teacher tends to take on more of the role of a facilitator. And in this case, the teacher is not really there to give direct instruction, but to help guide the students with the questions that they have, with any confusions, and to try and help students take command of their own learning. In this case, a lot of times students will work in small groups to gain instruction, and it gives students more choice, more autonomy, more feeling of responsibility and power over their own learning. So, based on a lot of the research that I've read about flipped learning, there are a lot of possible benefits that could come from integrating some flipped lessons into your class. One is the pause button. Because the students can watch lectures or video materials on their own time, they have the power to pause and rewind their teacher. That is how one high school student once put it. She can pause and rewind her teacher whenever she's unsure about something or perhaps needs to listen to something a little bit more slowly, while maybe higher level or more academically inclined students can actually watch videos at 2 times speed or 1.5 times speed and save time. So, and this really allows students to absorb new material at their own pace. Super students, even though it might take time for students to absorb the new processes of flipped learning, I think that it really gives students a lot more autonomy and agency over their learning. They are really responsible for absorbing the material and being able to apply that material in class. So I think it gives students a lot more ownership over their learning. Also, I think it gives a lot more opportunities for one on one instruction from a teacher. So while students can all be working on different tasks during an in class time, the instructor can really give a lot more specific and targeted help towards students who really need it. And it allows for a lot more differentiation of instruction because rather than trying to deliver the same content over the span of a lecture, the teacher can give very specific points or tidbits to students who have very specific questions. And finally, I think that flipped learning opens up a better question and answer dialogue between the teacher and the student. So students might have a little bit less confusion, or they might have what I like to consider a desirable difficulty. They might see some parts of the lecture material that they find really challenging. And so rather than coming to class tired or with zero direction or idea, they come to class with a question. They come to class with something ready to work on, some way to expand their learning. They are more prepared. These are some quotes from previous students that I've read, not from my own class, but from research journals. One student was very happy to do tasks with their classmates because I had prepared very well for these tasks. I used to be very scared speaking publicly. And I think that delivering some of this content online helps students develop the confidence that they need to really speak up in class and be able to produce more of a contribution even if they might not necessarily be on the same academically inclined level as their peers, they're still able to find places for contribution. And finally, moving direct instruction outside the classroom makes room for engaging students in communicative activities and interaction in the target language. So, my idea for our class was by giving you these lecture materials outside of class, it makes a lot more room for more dynamic and engaging communication once we come inside the classroom. And I think the same can work for you and your students as well. However, based on my academic readings and based on some of my own experiences, flipped learning is not all sunshine and rainbows. There can be some challenges involved, some cons. A oft cited complaint about flipped learning is that it's time consuming. And I don't dispute that. I think that, especially up front, it can be difficult to produce some of these lecture materials. However, other people have argued that number one, it's not mandatory to do every lesson as a flipped lesson. You can start small and build just a little bit over time. Moreover, I think if you carefully design the lecture content, hopefully you have a lot of what I call evergreen material. What I mean by evergreen material is that they are videos or resources that they can use year after year after year, rather than only being good for 1 year. So if you choose to go down the flipped learning path, you could find yourself doing a lot less work in consecutive teaching years because you already have these materials made. Another off-sided critique is flipped learning can sometimes be very difficult in very, very large classes. Yeah, I think that when the class size is larger, it makes more challenges all around. However, I think that also the technology today and the ability to distribute materials online can make it easier for outside class. It's inside class, I think, that it can be challenging to incorporate more flipped learning when you're trying to facilitate a class of, say, 30 or 40 students. And other researchers have made the cultural critique in a lot of countries, like perhaps Korea, students might have like a kind of mindset towards more traditional instruction. So in some situations, it might take some time and some adjustment for students to get used to a flipped model. However, I think that this is also true in the US as well, and it's true or mostly around the world. Flipped learning is still a relatively new idea and it's sort of slow to gain traction. So I think that the cultural argument isn't extremely important because I think that students can adjust to any classroom atmosphere and any class structure as long as there's a good underlying logic to it and if it is executed properly. All right, so to wrap up our talk about flipped learning, I wanted to give a brief example of some flipped videos that I once did for my high school students back in Namak. So, as the native teacher, I had to give a speaking test. So, rather than just simply distribute a list of questions that I might ask them, I decided to prepare this.
What is most important for success? I think it is most important to serve. We need to help other people in order to be successful. I think it is important to have passion. Success is hard. You have to enjoy what you do. I think it is important to persist. Success takes a long time. We have to be patient. What will your future job be? And why? I want to be a doctor because I want to help sick people. I want to be a pro gamer because I love to play games. So, I want to be paid to play games. I want to be a PE teacher because I want to help students be healthy.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that, and I appreciate your patience through this video. So I hope to see you all very soon, and hope you finish your lecture notes in due time. And until then, take care, everybody. Cheers.